it's a huge accomplishment to write a novel.
It is.
Lots of people dream about it. Lots of people start it. But if you've gotten this far, that's amazing. So yay, feel good about that. And then now comes the fun part of editing. And I call it creative editing because I think that's when your imagination gets going and you can get reinvigorated about your book and just make it better than the first draft, which we all have to do.
Fresh perspective. And this is what we're trying to share here is, when you look at it from a different point of view, it really comes alive in different ways, and you'll start to see and appreciate what you've done and also understand what it needs just a little bit more to make it shine. So tell us about plot point 2.
Plot point 2. Okay. So if you haven't watched the previous videos, we did a first one that did a high level view of the story arc for the inciting incident, plot point 1, the middle, plot point 2, and the climax. And then we followed each of those, and now we're up to plot point 2. And plot point 2 is the low point for your protagonist. It's when everything looks bleak and all that the protagonist has done from the middle of the book where they became proactive and all the mistakes they made have led them to a really terrible point. And what this does for them, they gotta pull up their socks, to use a cliche, and get determined to reach their goals. And so it's really a point where it's that moment of, okay, I'm going after this. I'm going to reach my main goal. And remember the blurb, you know what the main goal of the story is. So that's going to help you when you're defining what your plot point 2 is.
Exactly. So when we're doing this, we're looking at the scene. How do we use this effectively? Tell us, what are the things we need to include?
Okay. So in the scene, it's like all the others, the protagonist must be in it. By plot point 2, you may want the antagonist in it as well, depending on what type of book you're writing. If it's a head-to-head protagonist villain kind of book, then this is a good place to have them together and make the antagonist come out ahead at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So the protagonist is really struggling. It needs to be active. So no summary, no backstory. By this point in the story, nobody wants backstory anymore. We have enough. We know who the protagonist is. We know what their motivations are. So try and cut out any backstory. Don't do a flashback at this point. Really active in the moment. It's should be the second most tense scene in your book. And the tensest, of course, is the climax. So don't make it bigger than the climax or people will be disappointed by the climax. So you got to balance the two together.
Okay, perfect. Any pitfalls? You're telling us there are most of those. Is there anything else that we might, like any common mistakes?
Common mistakes are not having one. So the story just keeps going, you can't find it. There are too many characters in it. So have it really focused. Look at every character in the scene and go, do they need to be here or not? Because what we want as a reader is, how is the protagonist feeling? So that leads you to, then you have to write it from the point of view of the protagonist, right? Yeah. How are they feeling? What decisions are they going to make? How are they going to move forward? And those things can come in the next scene after plot point 2. Plot point 2 is the beginning of Act 3, end of Act 2. And so you have room to put that in. It doesn't have to be in plot point 2 because we want plot point 2 to be super active and fast. And then you can do the sequel scene behind it. You don't want it too early or too late. So watch its distance. It's around the 75% mark. And again, that's a guideline. It can be earlier, a little bit later, but watch that your story arc doesn't look funny. Fictionary storyteller will draw it for you. And if the line is too steep, then it's the two plot points are too close together and it's rushed. And if it's drooping, they're too far apart and the story is going to feel like it's dragging. So you got to watch placement.
Right. And I think this is good. We're taking that blurb again, we're making sure everything matches. And, if you're having trouble with that, ask the editor, because this is exactly, again, these are the behind the scenes editing tools or the checklist, that we are using on ourselves to make sure that your story follows, objectively what it needs done. Editors also do all the other subjective, how to make it emotional and things like that. But objectively, to make sure that you are doing the bare minimum of the best. And I love to say the bare minimum of the best, but to achieve that, you need to be following these outlines. And so make sure, and if you don't understand, or if you don't find it, there is more help inside the software. Of course, storyteller for the clients or the authors, and a story coach is what we're using as story coach editors. So there's more information there, or just get some help. Always reach out. There's loads of people here, and it's a collaborative work. So we're glad to help you with that. So again, we're going to go back to our homework today. Homework? Is that? Whoop.
Before we do that, before we do the homework, we've
more.
got to talk about Gone Girl. There's more. We've got to talk about plot point 2 for Gone Girl. Yeah. Obviously a book I love. But anyway, we've chosen Gone Girl because it's commercially successful and follows this story arc. So it's a great example for it. So we had the inciting incident where Nick comes home. He's the protagonist, finds his wife missing, blood in the kitchen. Right. Then we had plot point 1, where he finds a clue from Amy. So he knows she's up to something. So now he has to do something about that. In the middle, his reputation has been tanked by the media. So he decides to hold a press conference, and a secret friend that he didn't know about of Amy's pops up and just attacks him. So now he has to defend his reputation. He has to figure out what happened to Amy, or he's going to jail because people think he killed her. Right. So he does a whole bunch of stuff that makes his life a disaster. And then what happens is Amy comes home. So she shows up at plot point 2 and lies about being kidnapped. Well, at this point, Nick wants nothing to do with her. He really wants her out of his life, but she's done what she's done in such a way that she can frame him for attempted murder. And so if he doesn't stay with her, he's going to jail for attempted murder, and he's totally set up. So now he's thinking, I can't get away from her. I don't want to go to jail. I'm stuffed, right? Life's a problem here. So it looks really bad for Nick. And you can see here, the protagonist and the antagonist are in the scene together, and they haven't been in a scene together until now. And it makes it super tense. Mm-hmm. And then off they go now. Rising action, pick it up now. Tension, 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 tension until the climax. So the homework is use your blurb, find your plot point 2, check that it's in the right place, check it's active, the protagonist is there. And if you don't have one, or you think it's too weak, then figure out from your blurb what should be happening at this point to make it a bottom out point for your protagonist. Right.
I think that's great. I'm really loving this section that we're dealing on, because it's really the story. And I think for writers, it stimulates all these other things. The rest is a lot of checking and double checking, but this is really more that creative, and am I putting the puzzle pieces together so I've got my bones lined, and we're getting all that meat on there nice and juicy. So thank you so much. We'll be back next week as we continue through our story arc and get all these things aligned so that your story is the best. Please follow along, share, and subscribe, and we hope to see you again next week. Thank you, Kristina.
Great, JoEllen. See you next week.